The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. A small girl, maybe 8 years old, stood beside her guardian in front of the judge's bench. Her hair was tied neatly into 2 buns, and her shoes dangled above the floor as she sat in the witness chair. The nameplate in front of the judge read, Honorable Margaret Ellis. Everyone in the courtroom knew the case. A public altercation between a local police officer and a young single mother had made headlines after bystander video surfaced. The mother had claimed excessive force during what should have been a routine traffic stop. But what turned the case from procedural to national news was the presence of a child, the woman's daughter, who had seen everything. Now, that child was here. She didn't cry. She didn't stammer. She looked calm. Too calm. The officer, a tall man in uniform with graying hair and a stiff posture, sat across the room, flanked by lawyers. His face was unreadable. But his eyes kept drifting toward the girl. Do you know why you're here today, sweetheart? Judge Ellis asked gently. The little girl nodded. To tell the truth, she replied. Can you point to the man you saw that day? The courtroom braced for it. Cameras weren't allowed, but journalists scribbled furiously. The air felt electric. The girl turned slowly. She raised her small hand, pointed directly at the officer, and said 6 words that made every jaw in the room drop. That's him. He made Mommy disappear. Gasps. Silence. Then the sound of the officer shifting uncomfortably. Judge Ellis cleared her throat. What do you mean, dear? The little girl turned back to the judge, eyes wide but clear. I saw everything, she said. And I remember what he said next. The judge leaned in slightly. Go on, sweetheart. What did he say? The little girl hesitated, her small fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her dress. Her guardian, seated nearby, gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, the girl raised her head and looked directly at the judge. He said Mommy was making trouble, she replied. But all she did was cry. There was a subtle shift in the room. The officer's lawyer reached into his briefcase, flipping through notes, while the prosecution team exchanged glances. A few people in the audience covered their mouths. The courtroom wasn't just listening now, it was feeling. And then what happened? Judge Ellis asked, her voice still gentle. The girl turned toward the jury. He grabbed her. She screamed my name. A juror, a middle-aged woman with silver hair and glasses, blinked back tears. I tried to run to her, but another officer held me back, the girl continued. Then he told me not to talk about it. He said I was too little to understand. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't trembling. She was just stating the facts, as clear as any adult. And did your mother come home that night? The judge asked quietly. The girl shook her head. No. I waited by the window. A deep silence wrapped around the courtroom again. Every eye was either on the child or the man in uniform who couldn't meet her gaze. One of the jurors whispered to another, she remembers every detail. The judge tapped her gavel lightly, not to interrupt, but to remind everyone that this wasn't a show. Then she asked, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? The girl thought for a long moment. Then she looked directly at the officer. I remember your voice, she said. You told Mommy, no one's going to believe you anyway. The words didn't echo, they slammed into the room like a shockwave. The officer looked like he'd been hit. For the first time, he turned his head away, the officer's lawyer quickly stood. Your Honor, we object to the emotional manipulation of a minor witness. Judge Ellis didn't even glance at him. She's recounting what she remembers. Sit down, counselor. The lawyer paused, then sat. The silence returned, heavier this time. The kind that squeezes the air from the lungs of everyone present. The prosecutor rose slowly and approached the witness stand. He knelt so he was at the girl's eye level. You're doing very well, he said softly. Can I ask you just a few more questions? She nodded. When your mommy cried out, do you remember what she was doing? The girl looked down, thinking carefully. She was asking him why he was yelling. She said she didn't do anything. And what did the officer do when she said that? The girl's lips pressed into a line. He pushed her against the car. She hit her head. There were audible gasps again. The officer's lawyer stood, face tight with panic. Your Honor, we have no evidence of a head injury. This is speculative, Judge Ellis cut in. Overruled. She's describing what she saw. The prosecutor continued gently. Did you see anyone else there who said something? The little girl looked up. A lady with a phone. She was filming. The courtroom buzzed. This part hadn't been confirmed before. The original footage shown on the news had been short, shaky, and unclear, mostly sounds and chaos. A second recording? The judge leaned forward. Are you saying there's another video? The girl nodded. She said she'd show people if anything bad happened. The prosecutor's eyes lit up. Do you know who she was? The girl shook her head. She gave me a sticker. It had a smiley face. The entire courtroom felt like it was holding its breath again. A potential second witness. One who might have captured everything. But then the girl added something no one expected. She told me not to be afraid. She said, people will listen if you're brave. The judge sat back. The prosecutor slowly stood. Even the officer seemed to slump. And the girl, with her feet still dangling, looked around the room and said, I'm being brave now. The words hung in the air like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I'm being brave now. No one moved. Even the stenographer paused, hands hovering over the keys, momentarily stunned by the weight of that simple declaration. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, we request a recess to locate this possible second witness. This new information could be critical. Judge Ellis gave a single nod. Granted. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The gavel struck once. The courtroom stirred, but no one spoke above a whisper. Reporters rushed toward the hallway to phone their editors. The jurors filed out slowly, some wiping their eyes. The officer remained seated, shoulders stiff, staring at the desk in front of him like it might dissolve. The little girl stood from the witness chair, but her eyes never left the officer. She wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. Outside the courtroom, chaos brewed. News anchors were setting up tripods, and camera crews jostled for the best spot. But inside, in a quiet waiting room, the girl sat with her guardian. You did more than we ever expected, her guardian said, brushing a hand gently through the girl's curls. You were strong. The girl tilted her head. Will they listen now? The guardian hesitated. They have to. Back in the courtroom, the defense scrambled. The officer's legal team whispered furiously, flipping through documents and preparing for damage control. Meanwhile, the prosecution began tracing every public lead, trying to identify the mystery woman with the sticker. Then, just as the bailiff returned to prepare the room, a court clerk approached the judge with a slip of paper. There's someone outside, Your Honor. A woman. She says she was there that day, and that she brought a video. Judge Ellis looked down at the paper, then up at the silent courtroom. Bring her in, she said. The doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open, and in walked a woman in her early 30s. She wore jeans, a gray hoodie, and had a calm but serious expression. In her hand was a small black flash drive. All eyes turned to her, jurors, lawyers, even the officer, as she stepped forward with quiet confidence. She didn't look like someone seeking attention. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment. The bailiff guided her to the witness stand. Judge Ellis addressed her directly. State your name, please. Alina Reyes, she said clearly. And what brings you here today, Ms. Reyes? Alina held up the flash drive. I was there. I saw everything. And I recorded it. The defense attorney bolted up. Your Honor, we have not received this footage in discovery, you're receiving it now, Judge Ellis said. Ms. Reyes, you understand this video will be entered into evidence? Yes, ma'am, she replied. A court technician retrieved the drive and brought it to the judge's bench. Within minutes, the courtroom screen flickered on. The lights dimmed slightly. The room fell into breathless silence again. And then, video. The camera was shaky but clear enough. You could see the street, the parked car, the flashing lights of the patrol vehicle. The voice of the girl's mother was heard, calm but frightened. Then came the officer's voice, louder, sharper, commanding her out of the vehicle. Next, the shove. The audible gasp. The scream of a child, "Mommy." And then, unmistakably, the officer's voice, "Nobody's going to believe you anyway." There was no mistaking it. No room for interpretation. The video ended. The silence that followed was suffocating. The judge turned to the jury. Some were pale. One had her hand to her chest. The defense attorney looked like he was physically shrinking. Judge Ellis finally spoke. Thank you, Ms. Reyes. Please remain available for questioning. We will resume testimony shortly. As the woman stepped down, the little girl, watching from the side, whispered to her guardian, "That's the lady who gave me the sticker." The courtroom had changed. It wasn't just a trial anymore, it was a reckoning. The jury sat frozen. The defense attorney fumbled with his tie, flipping pages in a binder that suddenly felt useless. The officer no longer looked composed. His hands gripped the arms of his chair. His face, once unreadable, now showed cracks, tension in his jaw, sweat on his brow. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we'd like to recall the child to the stand. Judge Ellis nodded. Granted. The little girl was gently led back to the witness chair. This time, she walked without hesitation. Do you recognize the woman who just testified? The prosecutor asked. The girl smiled faintly and pointed. She's the one who stayed. She told me to be strong. And is that the moment you remember, the video we just saw? The girl nodded. That's what happened. Mommy didn't do anything wrong. The prosecutor stepped aside. But then, unexpectedly, Judge Ellis leaned forward and asked, why did you decide to speak up today, even though you were scared? The girl paused, then said something so simple and powerful it silenced the room again. Because if I didn't, no one would know what the truth really looked like. Even the court reporter stopped for a heartbeat before typing again. The officer's defense attorney tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. This court will recess until tomorrow morning, she said. And let me be clear, this case is no longer about confusion or doubt. It's about truth, and what we choose to do with it. Gavel strike. As the room emptied, the girl stepped down from the stand. Alina Reyes, the woman with the video, knelt beside her. You were amazing up there, she said softly. The girl looked up at her, then toward the hallway where her mother had once walked. I just wanted someone to listen. Now, it was clear, the entire country was listening. The next morning, the courtroom was at capacity. Word had spread overnight. News outlets from across the country were now covering the trial, and social media buzzed with clips and quotes from the little girl's testimony. Judge Ellis entered briskly. Court is now in session. The officer sat stiffly beside his attorney, no longer composed, now visibly shaken. His career, reputation, and future were all on the line. But what made him most uneasy wasn't the press. It was the little girl. She had looked at him not with anger, but with truth. And that, somehow, was worse. The prosecutor stood. We ask the court to play the video again. The jury deserves to see it uninterrupted before we move forward. Judge Ellis nodded. The screen lit up. The same footage played again, but this time, you could feel how it landed. Jurors leaned forward. Some took notes. Others stared at the officer, watching for any reaction. He offered none. When the video ended, the judge spoke directly to the jury. This video, combined with the witness testimony, raises serious questions, not just about what happened on the street, but about how we respond when those in power are challenged. The officer's lawyer stood. Your Honor, may we approach? Judge Ellis waved him forward. The two sides huddled in whispered conversation. Meanwhile, the girl sat beside her guardian, quietly coloring on a notepad someone had given her. Despite everything, she looked at peace, like someone who had finally been heard. And then something unexpected happened. The officer stood. The room quieted. He turned to the judge and then, without warning, to the girl. I want to say something, he muttered. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Don't, but the officer pulled away and said, she's telling the truth. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. The judge didn't speak. The prosecutor didn't move. Even the girl stopped coloring. The officer swallowed hard. I panicked. I lost my temper. I said things I shouldn't have. I thought nobody would believe her, because she was small. Because I was the uniform. Then he looked at the jury and said, almost broken, but she saw me. And now you all do too. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the judge didn't speak right away. The officer's words hung heavy in the air, a confession, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't part of any legal strategy. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. Judge Ellis finally leaned forward. Officer Daniels, are you stating, under oath, that the child's account was accurate? He nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. Every word. His lawyer sat down in disbelief, face pale. The prosecutor stood, hands clasped in front of him. In light of this confession, the state is prepared to move forward with charges of misconduct, unlawful use of force, and obstruction. The judge nodded. So noted. But the focus wasn't on the paperwork or the procedure anymore. It was on the girl. She looked at Officer Daniels, the man who had once towered over her and her mother, shouting, grabbing, silencing. And now? He looked smaller than she remembered. The judge called for a recess, but no one moved right away. As people began to shuffle out, reporters rushed to get statements, jurors whispered among themselves, and attorneys began prepping for what would come next. But one moment stood still. As the little girl passed by the officer on her way out, she didn't look away. She paused. And then she said, not with anger, but with quiet certainty, you didn't scare me forever. He lowered his eyes. The courtroom door closed behind her. And just like that, a story that started with silence, ended with truth. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Journalists held microphones high, hoping to catch a quote. Cameras flashed. Protesters and supporters alike gathered with signs, some in outrage, others in solidarity. The city had turned its attention to this little girl who had spoken the truth that shook an entire institution. But inside a quiet conference room, far from the noise, the girl sat with her guardian and the prosecutor. You were incredibly brave, the prosecutor said gently. Because of you, we're going to make sure this doesn't get buried. The girl looked up from her coloring book. Will mommy come home soon? The room fell quiet. We're working on that, her guardian said quickly, squeezing her hand. But what you did today helps make that happen. Across town, Officer Daniels was escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. The cameras caught everything, but for once, the story wasn't about him. It was about the little girl who spoke 6 unforgettable words. Back at the courthouse steps, Alina Reyes, the woman who had come forward with the video, stood at a podium beside the prosecutor. I didn't come forward at first because I was scared, she admitted. I thought no one would take me seriously. But then I saw her, that little girl. And I realized, if she could speak up, so could I. A reporter shouted, "Do you think this will change anything?" Alina looked out at the cameras. It already has. Later that evening, the girl and her guardian sat on the couch at home, watching the news play back clips of the trial. The reporter's voice narrated, "In a case that stunned the country, the turning point came not from legal arguments, but from the voice of a child, and 6 unforgettable words that reminded us all of the power of truth." The girl watched quietly, then turned to her guardian. "Do you think Mommy saw it?" Her guardian smiled, holding back tears. "I think she's proud of you. Just like the whole world is." The next morning, the sun broke through the curtains of the small apartment, casting light across the kitchen table where the girl sat with a bowl of cereal. Her guardian scrolled through their phone, their face lighting up with surprise. "Sweetheart," they said gently, "you're on the front page of almost every news site in the country." The girl looked up, spoon mid-air. "Me?" Her guardian turned the phone around. There she was, a still image from court. Her small finger pointing, eyes steady, with the headline, "The 8-year-old who spoke truth to power." The story had gone global. Hashtags with her name trended everywhere. Messages of support poured in from teachers, families, even public officials. Artists began sketching her likeness. Journalists called her a symbol of courage beyond her years. But despite all the praise, she stayed grounded. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It was a court official, carrying a sealed letter. "From the office of Judge Ellis," he said. "For her." The girl opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note, "You reminded this courtroom what justice is supposed to be. Never let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter." Judge Margaret Ellis. Folded inside the note was a small gold pin in the shape of a scale, the symbol of justice. Her guardian knelt beside her. "You changed things, you know." The girl looked at the pin, then at the door. "Can we visit Mommy today?" Her guardian nodded, eyes glassy. "Yes." The judge approved a visit. "And there's more, they're reviewing her case. Everything's being reopened." The girl's eyes lit up, brighter than they had been in weeks. "Really? Really?" As they left the apartment, the streets outside looked different. Not because they had changed, but because now, the world was listening. And the girl? She was walking tall. The car ride to the detention center was quiet, but not heavy like before, it was full of hope. The little girl stared out the window, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the justice pin now clipped to her shirt. When they arrived, a guard greeted them and led them through a series of security doors. Her guardian held her hand tightly as they entered the visitation room. And then, there she was. Her mother. Behind the glass, wearing a beige jumpsuit but with a face that lit up the moment she saw her daughter. The girl pressed her palms to the glass and smiled wider than she had in weeks. Her mother picked up the phone on her side of the divider. "Hi, baby," she whispered, voice cracking. "Hi, Mommy." The guardian handed the girl the phone, but she didn't speak right away. She just looked at her mother, truly looked, and finally said, "I told them everything." Tears streamed down her mother's face. "You did?" The little girl nodded. "They listened. Even the man in the uniform said I was right." Her mother covered her mouth, overcome. "You were so brave." "I remembered what you said," the girl added. "You told me to always tell the truth. Even if my voice shakes." Her mother laughed through tears. "I did say that." "They're looking at your case again," the girl said proudly. "They're fixing it." A moment passed. Then her mother, holding the phone tightly, said, "You saved me." The little girl didn't know what to say. But she didn't have to. Because in that moment, everything changed. Across town, in a quiet judge's chamber, new documents were being reviewed. Charges were being reconsidered. Statements were being reread. The system, slow, flawed, and often cold, had been shaken by a child who dared to point and say 6 unforgettable words. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was full again. But this time, it wasn't for a trial, it was for a hearing. The little girl sat in the front row beside her guardian, clutching the same stuffed bear she had brought on the very first day. Judge Ellis entered, just as before, but today her robe seemed lighter, her face more relaxed. Across the room, the prosecutor stood. Your Honor, after reviewing the newly submitted evidence and testimony, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Ms. Harper, in full. There was no objection. Judge Ellis looked down at the documents, then at the courtroom, then directly at the little girl. In this courtroom, we often talk about justice, but rarely do we see it driven forward by someone so young, so determined, and so courageous. She turned her gaze to the back doors. Bring her in. The side door opened, and there she was. The girl's mother. Free. The little girl stood up instantly and ran toward her. There were no cameras this time, no reporters, just the sound of a mother and daughter holding each other like time had stopped. Tears flowed freely across the courtroom. Even the bailiff was blinking hard. Judge Ellis gave them a long moment before she said the words everyone had been waiting for, case dismissed. Ms. Harper, you are free to go. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted into applause. But inside, it was quiet. Just the warm sound of a child whispering into her mother's ear, I kept my promise. I told the truth. And her mother, voice shaking, replied, and you changed the world, baby. That night, the girl's story aired again, not as breaking news, but as a tribute. A reminder. A reminder that truth, even when spoken by the smallest voice, can echo louder than any lie. And that sometimes, justice doesn't wear a robe or a badge. Sometimes, it wears pigtails.